Okay, so we're going to look at sharing the screen here so you can see PowerPoint there and here. All right, so we're going to be talking about kids' brain and brain development with our PowerPoint here. I'll start with this slide. This is kind of the new childhood in America. There's 1 in 3 kids are overweight, 1 in 6 has learning disabilities, 1 in 9 has asthma. You can read and see the numbers. The one I want to point out that's not quite up to date is the 1 in 88 has autism. It's not 1 in 88. It's actually 1 in 50 have autism. And I think I even saw one place it was 1 in 30 has autism. So it's a war on the children's health and wellness that's going on right now in our country. And half of the children have chronic illnesses. And this is like the new normal. We do not want this to be our new normal. We're going to focus primarily on your brain and brain health and what our brain is involved with. So it's involved with everything that you do, right? Your brain is how you think, how you feel, how you act, how you interact with people, who you are as a parent, child, spouse, employer, employee, teacher, preacher, you name it. Your brain is involved with all of those functions and all of those parts of your personality and everything that you do. Your brain is the most complex organ in your body. Right? There are 100 billion neurons in your brain, and each of those cells is connected to other neurons. That means there's approximately 1 quadrillion connections in the brain. More of those connections than stars in the universe. Well, now they've got the new telescope out there. We'd be able to see more stars, but the point is there are tons and tons of connections in our brain from neuron to neuron, which makes us so unique and complex. Only about 2 to 3% of your body mass is what the brain makes up, but it burns 20 to 30% of your calories and takes up 25% of your blood flow. It's a little fuel pig that's up there, and it needs oxygen and it needs glucose to stay healthy. And if at any time you start to deprive the brain of these vital components to maintain its survival, it will start to shut down the most vital areas in order to maintain function. So we're going to talk about how the brain grows and brain growth. The sensory and motor systems of the brain drive the growth of the intellectual and emotional systems. If your child has imbalanced in motor or sensory issues, you're going to have imbalanced function in the growth and application of their intellectual and emotional systems. If I can help you or leave you with anything to keep in mind, you need to memorize this picture. Essentially shows you the development of a child's brain from childhood into when they get to school. You can see it starts out with your basic sensory things from touching to movement to feeling to sound, taste, smell, which then moves up into the basic movements where the baby's or the child's movements involve learning to crawl, learning to walk, learning to turn their head without falling over, all those different things. And it keeps building until eventually they're able to do daily like living activities and behavioral components that they can control, leading up to the number one hardest thing your brain will ever do is going to school. There's so much going on just from the standpoint of the brain learning how to learn the reading and writing and arithmetic, but also social behaviors, social interactions, how to get along with their teachers, how to get along with their classmates, who to listen to, who not to listen to. All those things are all happening at the same time when your children are at school. So once again, the sensory motor system drives the growth of the intellectual and emotional system. Genetics are programmed to turn the development on in the sequence. However, if the sequence is skipped or missed, the brain will continue to grow, but it grows out of balance, out of sync. It's like the I Love Lucy analogy. My mom loves this analogy. It's a conveyor belt where Edith and Lucy are trying to put together, I think it's cupcakes or something like that. Well, they have too many pieces to put onto the cupcake, but the conveyor belt keeps going by. So eventually it just turns into a big mess. Now look at brain division of function, front to back. We have primarily in the back of the brain is sensory things that come into the brain, and the front of the back is the motor response. So if we look at sight, sound, taste, smell, touch, those are all sensory stimulus that comes to the brain. Then we have a motor output. Motor output being either muscles respond, or we have thoughts, we are focusing on things, or we have emotion responses. Emotions are a motor response to a stimulus from your environment. Now, processing and integration, we look at the left side of your brain is basically like the accelerator, deals with approach types, behaviors, happiness, anger, surprise. And the right side of your brain acts like the brake, more like avoidance types of emotions, sadness, fear, disgust. We need to have both, right? We need to be able to go out into the environment and explore. We also need to know that we need to be careful as well. We know electricity comes out of the light sockets and out of the wall sockets. I'm sorry. But we also know we shouldn't be sticking our fingers in there. A little more expanded as far as function goes, left side to right side. Get a chance to look at all those different things and how they're balanced off one side versus the other. The fancy term is called lateralization. It means we don't have a function on both sides of the brain. By allowing one side to have one certain degree of function and the other side to have others, it maximizes the number of things that our brain is able to do. There are certain systems that are involved with certain activities. So the prefrontal cortex near at the front is for executive decisions. And the temporal lobe is for sound, also for memory. Parietal lobe is for touch and position sense, like where you are in space. Occipital lobe is all about vision, but the vision is also a component of taking what you are seeing with your eyes and then translating that to your brain it so that it can use that information properly to guide you through your environment. The cerebellum is primarily for muscle coordination, balance, eye movements. The prefrontal cortex is the supervisor. Has many functions: focus, forethought, impulse control, organization, planning, judgment, empathy, insight. If there's something not quite right with the prefrontal cortex, short attention span, impulsivity, procrastination, disorganization, poor judgment, lack of empathy and insight. Have you ever seen this in a child before? Of course you have, because the prefrontal cortex isn't developed in the child. It's still growing. The prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until a person's 25 years of age, which makes it interesting why we have kids trying to make decisions about driving and joining the military and voting, and the part of the brain that's responsible for making good decisions isn't developed until they're 25. I guess the auto rental corporations are on top of things because they won't rent a car to anyone that is under 25. Cerebellum, part of the back of the brain, main idea is for motor control, muscle coordination, balance, so movement, right? It's responsible for movement and getting information from movement. And then once it gets that information, it sends it to the prefrontal cortex for it to make a decision about where to move through space. Cerebellum deals with posture and gait. As far as the executive function with the pre-PFC, the faster your cerebellum works, the faster your brain works. Kind of like the clock speed of a computer. If the cerebellum is not working properly, you will have gait and coordination problems, slowed thinking, slowed speech, impulsiveness, and poor conditioned learning. You're saying there's different scans or different pictures of the brain, and what they were is pictures of a brain that's having a SPECT scan done. SPECT scans looks at blood flow in the brain. So as long as we see this nice smooth contour of the brain, we know that the brain's getting full perfusion of blood and the brain's working right, you're working right. However, if for some reason the blood flow is altered, different regions of the brain will not function properly. If the brain can't work right, neither can you. Problems in specific areas tend to cause specific problems. So when you have the prefrontal cortex problems, you can have concentration tasks, schoolwork, right? Well, stress can cause the blood flow to move from frontal areas of the brain to the brainstem. Stress to your brain, whether it be physical, chemical, or emotional stress, your brain can't tell the difference. It needs to respond to that stressor, and it shifts itself into the fight or flight mode. The fight or flight mode is housed primarily in the brainstem. So with the blood flow that would normally go to the frontal areas of your brain start to navigate or gravitate back towards the brainstem, so your body can fight or flee or freeze from whatever threat is happening at that moment. Applications in school, potentially when you're encouraging students to try harder, if they are being stressed as you're saying that, it could actually make the situation worse. You're better off taking those kids and sending them outside and having them run around the building a few times and then come back. Exercise causes blood to flow to your brain, especially to the frontal regions of your brain. This is why they've done studies and shown that children tend to test better after they've been outside for recess as opposed to taking the test before going outside for recess. So what types of things would hinder your brain from growing, not allowing it to mature as it should? Well, here's a big one. Video games, TV, iPads, iPhones, any electrical devices that we see kind of running rampant through our society today. These are terrible for brain development, right? There's no movement involved, right? They're sitting and moving their thumbs. It bypasses the frontal lobe when this is the case, and it doesn't allow the frontal lobe to mature and to grow as it should. This is important because your personality and higher functions are housed in the prefrontal cortex and in the frontal lobes. Food additives can also be a challenge for the food growth. Colorings, flavorings, preservatives, they're all excitotoxins. They cause the brain neurons to fire so fast that they overdrive the system. It doesn't help that these things are carcinogenic as well. So we look at a broad variety of things to be aware of. Pesticides, industrial compounds such as solvents, detergents, toxic metals, plasticizers, insulators, combustion, incineration pollutants, stuff that comes out in smoke, synthetic medications, drugs, food additives, preparation byproducts, all these things can cause hindrance to the brain, right? Because they are toxic chemicals that are able to get inside the brain tissue and cause an inflammatory reaction, which then pushes the brain in the fight or flight system, which changes how the brain develops over time. Now, why should we be concerned? When they did a study several years ago, and they checked the umbilical cord of newborns and found 200 chemicals in the umbilical cord of newborn babies. That means the placenta is no safe place for the baby. The baby is also being exposed to all these toxins. The crazy part is, of those toxins they're being exposed to, they only think they basically can detect 1 in 14 of them, meaning there's not a test to determine or to find certain chemicals in the baby's blood. So if you take that into account, there might be 2,800 different chemicals within the baby at the time they are born. The other thing to consider as far as from food additives is sugar. Sugar is basically it's as addictive as cocaine. They've shown done studies where they've given rats cocaine, given rats sugar, and they will prefer the sugar over the cocaine because of its addictive qualities. It goes right into the pleasure centers of your brain. So every time you eat sugar, you feel good. And unfortunately, that keeps continuing to be the effect of now that part of the brain gets wound up on sugar and it craves it and it searches it out. So things that are helpful for brain growth is movement, right? Because movement fires your cerebellum, which fires the frontal part of your cortex, which helps it to grow, maintains blood flow, helps things to work like they should. And being consistent with these things. Don't just do it one day and then give up and wait 3 or 4 days. Or even though the kids may have recess, it needs to be consistent, which most schools are, which is great. Problem is when they get into junior high and high school now, instead of having recess every day, they have FIA, but they have it like every other day or 2 or 3 times a week instead of every day during the week. This is why getting the kids into sports and why athletes tend to do well is because of the added blood flow to their brains. I like the quote from Alan Gabby: while the benefits of organic food have not been proved scientifically, there's also no convincing evidence that eating pesticide-laden foods is safe. Your brain's main objective, or every cell in your body's main objective, is to promote survival. In order to do that, you need activation and fuel supply. Movement in all directions is activation. So not just forward and backwards as far as running, but lateral movements as well, and spinning, like on a merry-go-round. Natural foods are helpful. Supplementation. You can't get everything into your food anymore. So these are some of the things I recommend people take. Dynamic Greens is a specialty drink from a company called Nutridyne. Has 30 different fruits and vegetables ground up into a powder. You add to water and drink it. Vitamin D, living in the north, we are sickly deficient in vitamin D to where I've seen people where the rating scale is from 30 to 90 and they're at a 0.3. I mean, that's how bad it is for some people. This is huge because vitamin D isn't a vitamin, it's a hormone that has huge influences over your immune system. It's incredibly important that you get your vitamin D where it needs to be. Probiotics helps with gut status, gut inflammation. We know that the gut talks to the brain, so the less inflammation and things going on, and the gut will help the brain to be healthier. Fish oils, why do I say fish oils? Fish oils contain the essential fatty acids that our brain is primarily made up of. If somebody call, yeah, our brain is primarily made up of fat and water. And so it's important for us to get the right fats. And once again, to be consistent with all these things. Limiting screen time to 1 to 2 hours per day, if possible. I know with school there's more of that allowed, but it's more of the fact that kids are playing video games that's driving the system to drive a particular region of the brain that is responds to meeting goals. And video games, whether it be on TV or telephone or phones, whatever, are designed to be addictive. They're designed to make you reach easy goals and then to give you a ding or a buzz or a coin or whatever the case is, so that you then hit that goal. Every time you hit a goal, you release dopamine into your brain. Dopamine is one of your major I'm sorry, major neurotrope major hormones in your brain that is needed to promote good health, but it is very addictive, very dangerous if it gets out of control. It's the one that's involved with people that get addicted to alcohol or to gambling or to sex or whatever the case is. That's the neurotransmitter that does that. QEEG scans looking to see the electrical system of your brain and how well it's working. We can now look to see where the areas are overactive or underactive, and then use neurofeedback to train that area of the brain to get better at regulating itself. Functional eye exams are also cool because different regions of your brain control different eye movements. So we do a functional eye exam where we use a machine that locks onto a person's retina so it can follow how the eyes move. Then we check slow movement, saccadic or fast movement, and fixation, and to see how well those eyes work together as a team and make sure they're not isolating and becoming one eye being the dominant and the other eye not contributing. My name is Dr. Alan Rudolph. If you have any questions, chiropractor, a functional neurologist, and a neurofeedback specialist, you can reach me at 701-369-3938. I'll stop the share. Stop.